The Supreme Court has just dropped a bombshell that could redefine gun ownership across the entire nation. In a stunning 8-1 ruling, the highest court in America sent a message that will ripple through every state, every lawmaker, and every gun owner. This is not just another legal decision buried in complex language and technical filings. This is a ruling with teeth, a ruling that could transform how you own, carry, and protect your firearms. It started as a relatively quiet case, a legal dispute over state versus federal authority. But when the justices stepped in, everything changed. The court's decisive action dismantled a key state-level law and, in doing so, drew a bold new line in the sand for federalism, state sovereignty, and your Second Amendment rights. 8 justices aligned against the state's approach, leaving one dissenting voice to challenge the majority. But that lone dissent, though powerful, could only do so much. The implications are massive. What Missouri tried and failed to achieve may now become a blueprint for other states, carefully rewritten to withstand federal scrutiny. Gun owners across the country are watching closely because this decision doesn't weaken your rights. It reshapes the strategy needed to protect them. It's a wake-up call, a roadmap, and a battle plan, all in one. Today, we break down the Supreme Court's ruling, explore what the lone dissent signals about the future of federalism, and reveal exactly what it means for your state, your freedoms, and your firearms. The fight for the Second Amendment just entered a new chapter, and understanding this ruling could determine who holds the advantage in the battles ahead. The case that sparked this historic ruling began quietly, buried under layers of legal argument and state-federal tension. Missouri had passed a law aimed at defending the Second Amendment rights of its citizens, a bold attempt to resist what lawmakers saw as federal overreach. The goal was simple but ambitious: protect gun owners from regulations they believed were unconstitutional and ensure the state had the authority to defend its residents. At first, the law seemed a shield, a barrier against federal enforcement that could undermine individual freedoms. But as soon as it was enacted, legal challenges began to pile up. Federal authorities argued that Missouri's law crossed the line from non-cooperation into outright nullification of federal statutes, a move that the Constitution explicitly forbids. This was no ordinary courtroom battle. It quickly escalated into a constitutional showdown that would demand the attention of the Supreme Court. The stakes were clear. The outcome of this case would not just affect Missouri, but set a precedent for states across the nation trying to protect their residents' rights. When the Supreme Court finally issued its ruling, the reaction was immediate and electric. In an 8-1 decision, the justices rejected the state's legal approach while simultaneously affirming that the Second Amendment remains robust under existing rulings like Bruen. 8 justices concluded that Missouri's specific strategy, declaring federal gun laws invalid within the state, violated the Supremacy Clause, undermining the constitutional structure designed to balance state and federal powers. But even as the state's approach was struck down, the lone dissenting voice of Justice Clarence Thomas caught the attention of legal scholars and Second Amendment advocates alike. Thomas emphasized that states should have tools to push back against federal intrusion, planting a constitutional flag for future challenges. His dissent signaled that while this particular legal path failed, the fight is far from over and new strategies will emerge. For gun owners, this is both a warning and an opportunity. The ruling clarifies limits, but it also illuminates new pathways to defend rights within the law. Missouri's law included steep financial penalties designed to deter local law enforcement from cooperating with federal gun enforcement. Agencies faced fines of up to $50,000 for assisting federal authorities, and nearly 50 lawsuits were filed within months of the law's implementation. Local officials were suddenly trapped in a legal minefield, forced to weigh compliance against financial ruin. The strategy, though well-intentioned, backfired, creating a fragmented system that courts viewed as destabilizing rather than protective. The Supreme Court made it clear that anti-commandeering, a principle that allows states to refuse enforcement of federal law, is one thing, but nullifying federal statutes outright is another entirely. That single word, invalid, proved fatal, transforming a legal shield into a constitutional misstep. For states watching closely, this is a lesson in precision. Wording matters and legal strategies must align with federal structure to survive judicial scrutiny. Missouri's approach borrowed heavily from the playbook of sanctuary cities used in immigration cases. The logic seemed straightforward. If cities could refuse to assist federal immigration enforcement without invalidating federal law, states should be able to do the same for firearms. Yet, the legal nuances made all the difference. Immigration sanctuary policies rely on non-cooperation, leaving federal law intact, while Missouri's law attempted to go a step further by declaring federal regulations null within state borders. The court's interpretation was unequivocal. Non-cooperation is permissible, nullification is not. One phrase shifted the entire outcome, a reminder that legal battles are won or lost in the details. Missouri's misstep is now a blueprint for caution, teaching legislators that the fight for Second Amendment rights must be waged carefully and with historical precedent in mind. Justice Thomas's dissent was more than a solitary opinion. It was a signal for the future of federalism and gun rights advocacy. Known for his strict originalist approach, Thomas emphasized that states have inherent authority to resist federal intrusion, even if the specific law in question failed. His arguments remind us that legal battles are long-term campaigns, often stretching decades into the future. The dissent plants a flag offering guidance for future legislation and providing ammunition for states seeking to craft laws that both protect citizens and comply with constitutional limits. For gun owners and advocates, Thomas's stance is a beacon of hope, highlighting that while one approach failed, the broader goal of defending rights is far from lost. The Supreme Court's ruling also underscores the continued importance of the landmark Bruen decision. While Missouri's law fell short, Bruen remains the backbone of modern Second Amendment protections, requiring firearms regulations to align with historical tradition. Courts continue to strike down restrictions that fail this test, dramatically increasing the success rate of challenges to unconstitutional gun laws. Hundreds of regulations have already been overturned, demonstrating that while one state strategy may fail, the broader framework for defending gun rights remains strong. For gun owners, this means victories are still achievable, and the principles laid out in Bruen offer a roadmap for states crafting resilient, constitutionally sound legislation. The urgency behind Missouri's aggressive law stemmed from a real and growing concern about federal enforcement. In recent years, firearm inspections, compliance sweeps, and reclassifications of firearm components have increased dramatically. Millions of transaction records are now digitized and accessible to federal authorities, fueling fears that overreach could infringe on lawful ownership. Missouri's lawmakers sought to erect a barrier against this trend, driven by both legal principle and the genuine desire to protect citizens. The Supreme Court's ruling, however, reminds us that urgency cannot justify overstepping constitutional limits. Strategies must balance speed with precision, crafting measures that withstand judicial scrutiny while still defending individual freedoms. The Supremacy Clause was central to the court's reasoning. By attempting to declare federal law invalid within the state, Missouri crossed the constitutional line from non-cooperation into nullification. Anti-commandeering doctrine allows states to refuse assistance in enforcement, but it does not permit outright invalidation. The distinction, though subtle, is decisive. Courts emphasize that careful language and strategic framing are essential in legislative drafting, and states that ignore these lessons risk legal defeat. The ruling sends a clear message. Understanding constitutional structure is just as important as intent when defending rights. In the wake of this ruling, states are already rethinking their approach. Red states are revising laws to emphasize structured non-cooperation rather than nullification, consulting constitutional attorneys to ensure that new statutes can survive scrutiny. Legislatures are learning that subtle adjustments, avoiding words like invalid and focusing on operational procedures for law enforcement, can make all the difference. This wave of legislative recalibration is proof that the fight for gun rights is adaptive, ongoing, and increasingly strategic. Lawmakers are not backing down. They are learning from Missouri's misstep to craft smarter, more durable laws. Missouri's defeat was instructive rather than final. The Supreme Court clarified where the legal boundaries lie, but it did not weaken the Second Amendment. Instead, it sharpened the strategies required to defend it. Cooperation can be refused, but federal statutes cannot be nullified. Historical precedent, Bruen's framework, and careful statutory language are now the tools for future success. The ruling is a roadmap, a guide, and a lesson for legislators and gun owners alike. Understanding it is crucial for anyone invested in the defense of constitutional rights, as it marks the next phase of the battle for firearms freedom. For gun owners, this ruling is both a warning and a call to action. Awareness is key. Understanding what the Supreme Court allows, what it prohibits, and what strategies remain viable can make the difference between protection and vulnerability. Advocacy at the state level, strategic drafting of laws, and staying informed about federal enforcement trends are all essential steps. The battle for the Second Amendment is evolving, and the Supreme Court has set the parameters for future engagements. For those who defend these rights, knowledge is power and preparation is essential. Ultimately, this 8-1 Supreme Court decision represents a turning point, not an end. It clarifies the limits of state action, preserves the broader protections of Bruen, and signals a future where well-crafted legislation can protect gun owners without overstepping constitutional bounds. The fight for Second Amendment rights continues, but it is now more focused, more strategic, and more informed. The lessons from Missouri will shape policy, influence courtrooms, and guide lawmakers and gun owners across the nation. This ruling may have struck down one approach, but it illuminated the path forward, a path where rights are protected, strategies are precise, and the Constitution remains the ultimate guide. For every gun owner in America, this is the moment to stay informed, stay vigilant, and stand ready. The Supreme Court has drawn the battle lines, and understanding them is essential to securing your freedoms.